can I do? 'Cause I'm just a sinking ship, and you're just a pair of lips that I've lost in the moment. All I want is for you to come back. Now I'm caught in the middle of love, and I
Welcome to another edition of the Red Pill Diaries. I'm your host, Rashid, and once again, I'm joined by my friend and colleague, Brian Berletic of the New Atlas. How is it going today, Brian?
It's going very well. Thank you so much for having me back.
Man, it's always a pleasure to have you, and I like to chop it up with you. I want to go straight into some, Brian. We see the desperation of the U.S. empire and how she is just going full blast in every direction. What is going on with her policy to intimidate Venezuela and notice that the one of the opposition leaders just received the Nobel Peace Prize to legitimize her struggle in Venezuela. At the same time, the United States is building a massive naval armada and airstrike capability off the coast. The pressure that the United States is placing on Venezuela is tremendous. So what is this about, and where is this going?
Well, if people think back all the way to the beginning of the 21st century, the President George Bush Jr. administration, the U.S. had attempted to overthrow the Venezuelan political order. Then it was led by President Hugo Chavez. For a very short period of time, they actually succeeded. President Hugo Chavez got power back, and they have maintained it. He died, and his successor was Nicolas Maduro, who's now president of Venezuela. And they have been trying to crush, subvert, sabotage, divide, destroy Venezuela. All of this time, people who are familiar with U.S. history, even further back, know that Latin America has always been America's imperial playground. They have divided and destroyed nations, overthrown governments, installed brutal dictatorships for decades and decades, a century or more. And all of this to exploit the natural resources there, the human resources there, and in general, just to prevent any nation or group of nations from having an independent foreign policy, doing things their own way within their own borders, and dealing with other nations in ways they themselves decide to do. And these are all reasonable things every nation has a right to do, but the United States says, no, you have no right to do this. We will determine for you. And this is the problem they have with Venezuela. Venezuela poses no threat to the United States in any shape, form, or way. People should think about what the pretext of the day is regarding why are we building up a military force to strike at Venezuela. The supposed pretext is Venezuela is flooding the United States with illicit narcotics. President Nicolas Maduro is a narco-terrorist, and we have to stop him from poisoning men, women, and children with these narcotics. President Trump himself on the White House's official website has talked about how in the first 100 days of coming to office, they have secured the borders and they have ushered in an unprecedented era of homeland security. So how are these drugs crossing a secured border and making it to these Americans that are supposedly being poisoned? I have no doubt that Americans are being poisoned by illicit narcotics, but that's because the border was never secured, and that's because the U.S. has no intention of securing it, and they have no intention of dealing with the actual narco-terrorists the U.S. itself has been running and working with for decades and decades. It has nothing to do with Venezuela. And I guarantee you, after they, if and when they overthrow the government of Venezuela, the drugs will still be a problem. But American people move on. It's been going on for decades. I was born and raised in America, was a problem my entire time in the U.S. I know people who are in America. I have family members still in the United States. It's still a problem. It always has been. It always will be, because they're not serious about fixing it. It has nothing to do. Yes, someone in the comment section said Colombia. If you asked an American before this even started, where do all these illegal drugs come from? A lot of them would say Colombia. They're obviously crossing the border in places like Mexico or along the coast, not Venezuela. So this is, again, this is a weapons of mass destruction style fabricated pretext for yet another war of aggression. One thing that I want people to be clear about is a war with Venezuela has nothing to do with the United States retreating from the world, coming back to the Western Hemisphere and carving out its sphere of influence. There's a lot of people who maybe floated that as an idea, especially many months ago. Now, I think a lot of these people have passed on that idea. Venezuela, and when you really think about it, just look at the entire globe as a game board. You have the United States, its unipolar world order versus Russia, China, Iran, I guess to a certain extent, the other BRICS members. They want a multipolar world order. They want a global balance of power. The U.S. wants all global power concentrated in their hands. The U.S. cannot fight Russia and China directly, so they are fighting these proxy wars and encircling and containing them. They also see all of these other countries around the globe as potential partners for the multipolar world, or as a potential extension of U.S. geopolitical power by politically capturing them and then using them as disposable proxies, just like they're using Ukraine or Israel or the Philippines right now vis-a-vis China. And so this is what they are. This is what they're trying to do. Venezuela is in the Western Hemisphere. It's much closer to the United States physically, and it's very difficult for Venezuela's allies and partners, nations like Russia and China, to come to their aid in a time of national crisis. And so it's low-hanging fruit, and it's something the U.S. can get done and check off its list. It has all of these other countries it's targeting for regime change. We just watched the U.S. overthrow the government in Nepal, right on China's doorstep. There was instability in Indonesia. There's a border conflict here in Thailand with Cambodia. A lot of problems around the globe. So the U.S. is working on all of this simultaneously. Venezuela is just the most recent flashpoint in a global war they are waging on multipolarism.
So as we stick with Venezuela for 1 second, remember the United States had troops deployed supposedly in Colombia to fight drugs for 40, 50 years, and it only metastasized. And what do you say about the situation as they double down on this narco drug trafficking, so-called out of Venezuela, when and they're striking boats off the coast of Venezuela, and then Colombia comes out and say, hey, those weren't Venezuelans, those were Colombians. And then Trump doubles down and says, you're lying, those were Venezuelans. But the ally, the U.S., well, somewhat allied Colombia, said, no, you're striking our people. I mean, why isn't it getting much coverage, and why isn't anyone talking about this?
Unfortunately, and this is very unfortunate, Americans voted for President Donald Trump because I think deep down they want peace, stability, and they want to focus inward on their country. Unfortunately, from cradle to grave, Americans are deeply indoctrinated and conditioned. They vote for personalities. They don't vote for principles. They voted for President Trump because he was telling them things they wanted to hear. But first and foremost, they voted for this person, this personality, Donald Trump. And it's very difficult for Americans to admit, oh, this guy's lied to us. He duped us. And they don't want to admit that. And they'll say, well, even if he did dupe us, at least he's not Kamala Harris. And people on the other side do the exact same thing. They'll say, well, at least this Biden's bad, but at least he's not Donald Trump. And this is how they get Americans locked into this system of control. This isn't self-determination. This is a system of control that, first of all, distracts and divides Americans against one another. And it also ensures continuity of agenda moves forward. People might think that, well, President Trump was obsessed with this during his first term. There was a botched covert operation to try to overthrow President Maduro then. It failed, obviously. And so this is him coming back for unfinished business. But what people always forget, because you either support President Biden or you support President Trump. You're not really critically looking at what the other candidate is doing during their term in office. President Biden continued and added sanctions and was involved in political interference, trying to undermine Venezuela all during his term in office. President Barack Obama did the exact same thing from the Bush administration, openly trying to overthrow the government, to President Obama keeping the pressure on Venezuela. So this is continuity of agenda. They have been working on Venezuela. It's one of these nations. It's a real sticking point for the U.S. empire as a nation that is openly defiant, does not try to play a balancing act between its own best interests and appeasing the United States. And for that, they will be punished. The U.S. will punish them. And so people, they're not going to speak up about this. They think, if you're an American conservative, you think President Maduro's an evil leftist socialist. We don't even know what socialist means, but that's what Newsmax told me he was. And so he's a bad guy. Maybe we're not getting the whole story, but at the end of the day, he's a bad guy, and I'll stick with the president. And for Democrats or liberals, they're distracted with other issues. They just don't care about Venezuela because the controlled media that tells them what to think isn't making it an issue. And so it goes under the radar. And here we are. We're sleepwalking into another illegal war of aggression based on a very transparently false pretext.
And like you said, continuity of agenda. We can even go back to when they kidnapped Hugo Chavez out of office and held him, and they were getting ready to transport him out of Venezuela on a U.S. military cargo plane until the people said that they rose up and went into the streets and said that if he was not returned within 48 hours, they were going to destroy all U.S. interests in Venezuela, and the United States had to return him to power. So that goes beyond Donald Trump, that goes beyond Joe Biden, that is, as we say, continuity of agenda. Could this also be a move against the BRICS and the Belt and Road Initiative? Because we see, just like what America did against Russia, she started strategically taking out small trading partners that Russia had, Libya, Iraq, all of this, and it was helping the military industrial complex, because even though they were overthrowing the government, they were reorienting the military to buy U.S. weapons and U.S. equipment and stuff. So, and it also changed the Iraqis from using the euro to the dollar. Could this also be an attempt to try to secure dollar hegemony, even as other nations are moving towards the yuan, because Venezuela accepts the yuan as a currency to buy its oil?
Absolutely. So this is actually all about the U.S. war on multipolarism. I always bring up this New York Times article. There's many other articles about this topic, but there's a New York Times article from 1992. It's titled something like "The U.S. policy ensures no rivals," and it's talking about preventing any nation or group of nations from challenging American hegemony over the entire globe. And so, if you look at the entire globe as a potential space to control, and either you take it for your unipolar world order as an extension, a proxy for American power, or you allow it to integrate into a multipolar world that will counterbalance and eventually contain and neutralize your unwarranted influence. You can see that's why they would want to take a nation like Venezuela out. They would want to overthrow the government. It serves as a stark warning for other nations in the region. And yes, it most certainly would disrupt multipolarism. It would further, okay, you could say not in a really major way, but maybe kind of further isolate Russia and China. And people have to zoom out. They're obsessed with the battlefield in Ukraine or China and the trade war, and they lose focus of the big picture and how, yes, Russia is winning in Ukraine, but they lost Syria in the process. Iran is in incredible danger right now. The United States is encircling it with a united front of politically captured nations that have been transformed into battering rams against Iran. And the same thing goes for China. I see people in the comment section listing off all of the countries the U.S. has been destabilizing since President Trump took office just earlier this year. And it's a long list, and a lot of those countries are in Asia and they're along China's periphery. So this is a global conflict, and Venezuela is part of it. Despite its location on the globe, it is contributing to the overall balance of global power.
And it's ironic that you brought up Iran, because I was going to hit with Iran. Remember, Iran is now investing heavily in Venezuela. They've upped their trade. Iran has stores all across Venezuela. They've helped Venezuela out in hard times. They even sent military equipment to Venezuela, also openly, and sent a naval fleet there before, and this enraged the United States. So again, we just talked about it. What America is doing in Venezuela. Let's go across the Atlantic over to what they call West Asia or the Middle East. What is going on in there as the United States talks about fighting narco-terrorism while building up massive supplies of weapons in Israel for a strike, as Netanyahu sends a signal that they no longer want to fight Iran, posturing on one end that they no longer want to fight Iran, building up weapons to buy time, and yet at every turn they're saying that Iran is the greatest threat.
Absolutely, and the U.S. is posing as needing to fight a war of aggression against Venezuela to stop narco terrorists that they are imagining, hallucinating, fabricating, while President Donald Trump himself is literally shaking the hand of al-Julani in Syria, the head of al-Qaeda in Syria. He was just on the U.S. list of foreign terrorist organizations. He had a multi-million-dollar bounty on his head by the U.S. government, and they just took it all off like it was nothing because they got him in. And now he doesn't need to play bad guy anymore. Now he's good guy, and President Trump is shaking hands. So this shows you people voted for the person of Donald Trump, not principles, because if they voted for principles, they would see President Trump, just like President Biden and everyone else before them, they would see how hypocritical and empty their rhetoric is, and how it's not that they don't stand for principles. They're diametrically opposed to the principles ordinary Americans all share and believe in, even if it's way back in the back of their minds or deep in their heart. So it's a huge problem. And yes, so we have this regional unifying moment where President Trump has arranged peace between Israel and Hamas. And I always warn people, this is a very long-standing conflict. It is extremely emotional. You see the videos coming out of, say, Gaza, how heart-wrenching and sickening and just enraging the images and the videos coming out of what the Palestinian people have been put through as part of this conflict. And people, you can understand why they react emotionally rather than rationally or logically, why they would throw in with Hamas, because they see Israel is horrible and Hamas is pointing their guns at Israel. They did not stop and look at it strategically. They did not stop and take the 5 or 10 minutes it takes to follow the money. Who's funding Hamas? Who's arming Hamas? Where were their leaders staying primarily? Where's the bulk, the majority of their support coming from? It's coming from nations like Qatar. Qatar is a proxy, a politically captured nation of the United States. It hosts one of, if not the largest U.S. air base in the entire region. And the role Hamas plays as an extension of the Muslim Brotherhood is an extremist organization, an extremist force in the region that the U.S. can both use as proxies to destabilize or fight in areas the U.S. military cannot go, also as a pretext for the U.S. or Israel to go and fight, to militarize, to build up militarily, and then go in and fight. And this is what the Muslim Brotherhood and Hamas as an extension of the Muslim Brotherhood have been used for years and years. The Hamas, even during the U.S.-backed regime change war against Syria, they actually sided with the U.S.-backed terrorists, the Israeli-backed terrorists too, by the way, ISIS and Al-Qaeda. And so this is problematic. I understand why people reflexively side with Hamas, because the inhumanity they see taking place against the Palestinian people by the Israelis. But at the end of the day, if you're not following the money and actually figuring out what's really wrong, You cannot actually fix the problem. And what often happens is the problem gets worse. Now, what is the U.S. doing? What was the whole point of this conflict between Hamas and Israel in the first place? If people remember, just a day or two after October 7th, myself and Angelo Giuliano, we were warning people that this wasn't the beginning of the end of Israel, as some people were shouting and cheering. This was the beginning of the end for the Palestinians, first and foremost, but also a pretext for the U.S. to create the conditions regionally to wage war against Iran and its allies more openly. And that is exactly what happened. As this was playing out in Gaza, we saw attacks, decapitation strikes against Hezbollah's leadership, taking out the absolute top leadership of Hezbollah. And we saw these successive acts of aggression against Iran directly, first by Israel multiple times, and then by the United States itself. And now that conflict is paused. And as you say, Rashid, they're gearing up for another round while simultaneously saying they want peace, which is what they said ahead of the last round of violence that people remember. And the conflict in Gaza has served its purpose for the time being. If people have longer memories, they will remember there were many junctures where there were ceasefires, where Israel said, "I'm sorry, I'll go home," and everything went, kind of back to stasis. I wouldn't say resolved, but back to stasis until they needed to use this ploy again and get everybody divided, distracted, and start the blood flowing all over again. And so this is what they're doing. Unfortunately for the Palestinian people, it's maybe there'll be a temporary pause, which at least we could be grateful for that, but it will not last. This is not peace. Who actually thinks the United States or Israel is interested in peace? Who actually believes that? I don't care if you want to believe that, but who actually believes that?
And I was thinking that with the pressure that the United States is putting on Venezuela, and the momentum towards the Israeli-Iranian conflict 2.0, no one is talking about Epstein anymore. No one is talking about all of those issues that Trump and his administration could not push away through propaganda. They could not sweep it under the rug. They couldn't do anything, and it took a assassination of Charlie Kirk to then unite a base that was split in half, and to give Trump legitimacy to move on to Venezuela and to move on to Iran. To me, this is a big smoke screen, and this is what I call Walt Disney, this illusion that is going on so that they can keep war going and to keep their base. Because remember, back in the days when the Monica Lewinsky thing went down with Bill Clinton, he took us to war a little bit also. So couldn't this Epstein thing that they have over Trump, couldn't this be one of the main reasons why he's trying to drum up more war and trying to keep the headlines off of Epstein Island and the pedophilia and what was going on?
I mean, across Western elite, that is what's always going on. It's not, if it's not Epstein, it's some other circle of people abusing children, killing people, whatever it is that they're into in their private lives. It's interesting how this was an issue President Trump himself brought up and was using against the Democrats, his supposed opponents. And now that it's blowing back on him, he's not interested in anymore. But I would say that this is, I wouldn't say that it's a distraction. If these people are actually abusing children, that is a serious issue and it needs to be confronted. But what it's turning into instead is, again, just another distraction, just another point of contention where people are divided against each other and they're not focused on the most urgent issue, which is the U.S. is speeding towards world war. I mean, they're essentially fighting a world war in slow motion and through, if you want to call it hybrid warfare, instead of all out in the open directly. They have multiple proxy wars, subversion. They're burning countries to the ground through political subversion. It is essentially happening worldwide, and you could depict it as a war. And this should be our most urgent issue, and this is what we should all be talking about and uniting against. We should all be talking about peace and stability and the best interest of ourselves, our families, and our communities. This goes for Americans also. If you had you mentioned Charlie Kirk, I have so many people who hate him or love him, and all for all the wrong reasons. This was someone who was backed by a billionaire sponsor. He wasn't independent media. He was part of the establishment. And what did he literally go around the country doing? Stirring up trouble, stirring up anger, stirring up hatred. People said, "Ooh, he was talking, he would debate with anybody." What was the nature of these debates? Was there any point to it other than I'm right, you're wrong, we're better, you're not, these people are inferior, we need to get rid of them, they're the problem? Basically stirring up hatred, division, encouraging violence. You're promoting a war overseas. You might think, well, that's not like promoting violence here in America, but yeah, it is. You're promoting violence. There's violence and people dying. There's violence and people dying. This is what he was stirring up, and this is what he fell into and ultimately consumed him. And so this is a reflection of what American politics have become. It is all about division and distraction and preventing people from finding common ground. If you want to know if an American is actually interested in helping America, they will be building bridges and finding common ground, not pointing fingers and throwing rocks. And that's all you see on either side of the aisle, Democrat or Republican. Impossible to differentiate. And at the end of the day, as we always talk about, Rashid, is continuity of agenda. One prepares the next step for the other, and vice versa. And they, left foot, right foot, all the way up the stairs toward escalation, war, and empire. And that's what's going on. So, I don't know if I answered the question, but you're talking about President Trump and the whole Epstein thing. And yeah, anytime anything starts to stick, any issue starts to unite people, you will see them very quickly try to pivot, get everybody polarized and at each other's throats again. I think we've seen them do that multiple times in just a very short time too.
Swazzer Productions just asked a question. He said, Rashid and Brian, did you hear the news about the Netherlands literally seizing a Chinese-owned semiconductor company? Could you address that, Brian?
Yeah, so there was, let's see if I can find it. It's just I was just looking at it in Politico. Well, anyway, there was a Chinese, Nexperia. There was a Chinese semiconductor company, has a branch in the Netherlands, and the government essentially seized control of it, essentially. And they say the government will now make decisions for this company. The people actually running the company who own it, they don't get to make these decisions anymore. But who's surprised by this? Everything the United States has done to Russia, they will do to China. Again, this is all about maintaining unipolar hegemony. They're doing this to Russia already. They are working openly to also do this to China. So everything Russia and China have in the West will seize. They will take it away. They will not allow Russia or China to do business fairly in the West, if at all. And I constantly warn people about a coming blockade. We already see the US and Europe trying to incrementally work their way toward a blockade of Russian energy shipments. They've also been talking about this for years and years and years, blockading Chinese maritime commerce, everything, and energy going into China, products coming out of China. They want to stop all of this and strangle China, strangle its economy, collapse it, subordinate it, maintain Western hegemony over the world and over Asia. And the way they see as a problem the West's integration with the Chinese economy, and this is why they're decoupling. This is the whole point of sanctions, tariffs, seizing Chinese companies overseas. They're cutting all of the ties that link the Chinese economy to the West that would, in the mind of a rational person, encourage cooperation and stability. They're cutting all of this so that they can indulge in instability, chaos, confrontation, and eventually blockade and the war that will follow shortly after that. So this is what they're doing. And again, these are ideas that are in policy paper after policy paper spanning many years. And we have seen not just the policy paper be written, but we've seen the concrete steps recommended being taken since they were published. So it's very concerning. This is a warning that this is happening. There are people out there hallucinating that the United States is retreating from Asia. They can't win a war against China, so they're just giving up and going home. This is not happening. If you think that, you are delusional at best. That is not happening. The U.S. is openly preparing for a conflict with China, just as they're waging with Russia.
And what's so crazy about it is suicide, because if you cut off the shipping, if you're able to cut off the shipping, where are you going to get your products from? How are they going to make it to your stores? Your stores will close down. Unemployment will mount. There will be mounting bankruptcies. Your economy is already in a tailspin. It will collapse. So I think because they can't think rational, because they've dominated so long, and now they're seeing a multipolarity, I think it is doing something up here where they cannot rationalize a fair or freer world. And so they're willing to blow up the whole system to keep anyone else from ascending to their heights or above. Do you think so, Brian?
I think we've actually talked about this many times, Rashid. I think we've talked about how they would rather tear everything down and destroy it than accept a multipolar world where they're no longer, the hegemon of the planet. You have to think Westerners have dominated the planet for centuries, for generations, and they feel like this has been going on for so long that it's proof that they're inherently superior. And yet we see absolute irrefutable evidence that they are not superior in any shape, form, or way. China is catching up, surpassing the West in so many different ways. And it's not because the Chinese are superior, it's because we're all people. The Chinese people are focused on harmony, social harmony, unity, cooperation. They're working together as a nation. They're also working together with other nations. They're interested in doing business with other nations rather than this obsession with dominating everybody. And you see it when you're in Asia. You see how different society is, how different a society that's interested in coexistence versus being in the West in a society that is obsessed with, I'm stronger than you. And did you just look at me? I've had this happen to me all the time in the US. I've never had this happen to me even one time in Thailand, unless it was some white dude walking down the street looking for a fight. So, I mean, it's a cultural thing. It's a social thing. It's a historical thing. I think somewhere down the line, the West could rejoin humanity and be a very constructive member of a multipolar world. But it's not going to happen from within. It is going to be up to the multipolar world to survive this just self-destructive chaos that the U.S. is engaged in right now, just tearing everything, just lashing out everywhere, panicking. You said it in the beginning of the show, panicking. They're going to have to survive this. You can see how China, also Russia, they're leaving the door open. They don't hate America. They don't hate Americans. They're leaving the door open, and they're waiting for a time in the future where that reality, where the West is a constructive member of the multipolar world, that can happen. And they want to make the space for constructive interests across the West to develop and reach out to them. That's what they're doing. But it's going to be a long and difficult process. I think we can see that with the ongoing conflict in Ukraine, tensions rising with China, the chaos the U.S. is sowing across Eurasia, and the impending war that they're preparing for in Venezuela, in Latin America.
Mm-hmm. Let's see. Heidi K says, let me highlight her question. She says, how will China's new restrictions on rare earths for military purpose affect the U.S. military industrial complex? Will it be effective in curbing it, or will the U.S. find a way around it?
This is something that honestly I need to do more research. And intuitively you would say, because look at how angry the U.S. has become. They're beside themselves, and they have been complaining about how dependent they are on China. And again, it's because your whole system is run by for-profit corporations that put profit over purpose to the extent where they're not even thinking about their long-term self-preservation. This is how flawed this system is, that they are so dedicated to preserving. they have not taken the painful but necessary steps to become self-sufficient in this, and so they're going to have a very difficult transition time. I would highly recommend against complacency in thinking that no, the U.S. can't do anything and it's not a danger and it's all going to work itself out. I would highly recommend against that. It's always better to be on the safe side and prepare for the worst and hope for the best. This is the same thing I always say about the conflict in Ukraine. People look at the military industrial production on both sides. They say Russia has this conflict. I just warn against that, because the U.S. isn't just fighting Russia in Ukraine. They're fighting Russia all along its periphery, all around the globe, and across multiple different domains where the U.S. in some cases has tremendous advantages that Russia doesn't have.
And what do you think about this demand by Donald Trump to retake Bagram Air Base in Afghanistan? And we know that if they were able to do that, that would be China's underbelly, that would be Russia's underbelly, that would be Iran's underbelly, Pakistan's underbelly, India's underbelly, and it would be close to some of China's research and development areas in China and some of its nuclear facilities or whatever. Do you think that this is just a pipe dream? And if it's not a pipe dream, how do you think militarily China would act about that, on something like that?
I just want to tell viewers who aren't aware, that is what President Trump basically said. He's like, I want Bagram Air Base back because it's strategically located, against China. And what he's admitting is that this is all about you're taking territory and facilities in a sovereign nation away from them to threaten another nation right on its border. For people that don't know, Afghanistan borders China. It's Xinjiang region in the west. And so this is what the U.S. is openly doing. You've noticed, Rashid, and you remember when the U.S. used to care about public perception, and they used to go through great lengths to convince people that they were doing the right thing. Now they're out of time. They don't have time to do that anymore. So they're just out in the open, and you can see how they're cultivating a very depraved imperial mindset, even among the average American people who are not benefiting from this at all, but they're convincing them that they will benefit from this. And you see Americans kind of getting excited about it. They voted for President Trump to end the endless wars, and now they're excited that, Secretary Hegseth, Secretary of War Pete Hegseth, he's talking about the warrior ethos. All he talks about is killing people. It's like, is that what you voted for? I don't know. Maybe some people did. I think a lot of them didn't. But again, just like the U.S. salami slices its way to escalation against other nations and towards war abroad, they also do this in terms of public perception management at home, changing the mindsets of Americans from something very reasonable to something very unreasonable. We've seen how dangerous this has been throughout history. Germany ahead of World War II, for example, and the warning signs are all there. That's happening all over again. It's very dangerous. Can the U.S. take Bagram Air Base back? I don't know. I mean, maybe they could. I don't think China is going to do anything. It's just not their style. They haven't ever done anything like that. Do something militarily in another nation's within their territory. I don't see them ever doing that. But I don't know. We have to see. It's extremely dangerous. Is this for real? Are they really going to do this? Is this on their wish list, but just not practical? I don't know. We have to keep a close eye on it, though.
But they're not even pretending anymore. I believe it was the vice president, when he was asked about the actions that the United States were carrying out and how they could be considered war crimes, and he said they didn't give a S about it, and this was not diplomacy. This was like straightforward saying, we don't care about international law when it concerns us. We'll do what we want to do because we're the United States. Is that a sign that the desperation is mounting? Is that a sign that the United States now realize that time is actually not on its side and its policies to try to prevent China's rise, Russia's reemergence, to suppress Iran and to suppress the BRICS?
Yes, absolutely. And at the same time, they're cultivating a very toxic mindset among Americans themselves. So people heard J.D. Vance say this and they're like, oh, that's so cool. It's like, how could you say that? I mean, you have to understand, a lot of Americans who voted for President Trump and Vice President J.D. Vance call themselves Christian. And again, this goes back to them voting for a personality rather than for anything that even resembles any sort of principle. You're killing boatloads of people. We already know the U.S. has already done this with their drone warfare for over 20 years now. They have no idea who they're killing. They're killing suspected terrorists. These could be anybody. There could be collateral damage. President Trump and his administration are accusing these narco terrorists of not just smuggling drugs into the country, but also engaging in human trafficking. How do we know all those? Because there's a lot of people on those boats for smuggling just drugs. I mean, weight is money, and you've got what are all these people doing on the boat? Are these human trafficking victims that needed to be rescued, and you just blew it up and then you laughed about it? That's because you remember J.D. Vance was saying, oh, it would be a bad time to go fishing in the Caribbean, and people were laughing about that too. And it's like, what is wrong? Well, we know what's wrong with the people in Washington. They've always been wrong, but they are encouraging this depraved mindset among Americans themselves, and it will manifest in a horrible way, and it will blow back in a horrible way. I think people who are complaining about Charlie Kirk getting killed, I mean, he was contributing to a toxic, divisive, hateful, violent society. And it ate him up. And it's going to eat many more people up. And it eats people up every day that we don't put the flags at half-staff to honor or remember. Hundreds of people die from this all the time. Nobody cares unless it's someone that they know. And so, I mean, this is sliding down a slippery slope. This is what people have been warning about regarding the U.S., its society in general. The most fundamental things that need to be fixed if you want a great country, if you want a great country that is stable, peaceful, prosperous, strong militarily, that does not face any threats externally, you have to fix your society. You have to look in the mirror and look at your society honestly and say, is this where we need to be to achieve these things, or have we really wandered off the path, and we have a long way to go? And I don't think Americans are asking this, and they're being manipulated by the media. They're not even thinking about who these people are telling them these things that they're just repeating without even thinking about it. I've talked to Americans about the impending war with Venezuela, and they said, how, just like I mentioned earlier, how could Venezuela be flooding American borders with drugs if one of the first things Trump did was secure the border? And you can tell the Trump supporters didn't even think of, they never thought about that. They never stopped and asked, wait a minute, you're right, that doesn't add up. And even when you point it out to them, it goes back to, I voted for a personality, Donald Trump. I didn't vote for a principle, and I'm not going to acknowledge that this doesn't add up. And they'll just continue falling in line. It's just a tragic law of human nature that they have perfected exploiting.
So when we look at the American system, before we talk about what's going on in Russia, one of the main things that America, and I think the scholars miss, is as we look at the degradation and the decline of the American empire, one of the main pillars of American empire and success is education. The dumbing down of the American educational system and the defunding of America's educational system is like putting a ticking time bomb to the very foundation of America. And if you look at it, it is education, proper education, that guides us and civilizes us, and that instructs us. And we can see that we don't have the proper education, because if you walk down the street, you see savagery everywhere. And it's a reflection, it's a microcosm of the savagery we see in U.S. Global policy also. So that stands at the base of the fall of America. If they don't reflect within, they cannot stop this. There's an old African proverb that says, if there is no enemy within, the enemy without can do you no harm. And so the enemy within, they can always find money for war, for work, research and development of destructive weapons, for color revolutions. They can't find money for veterans that have served. They cut their pensions, they cut everything. They can't find money for Head Start. They can't find money for education. They can't find money for debt relief for the future scholars, politicians, leaders, generals, scientists, architects of the future. This is what is helping to bring down the American empire, because without proper guidance, without proper education, we are left with nothing but savagery. And it is evident right now. What do you say about that, Brian?
It's a really good point. And the problem all empire throughout history faces is there's a trade-off. You have a highly educated and skilled society. They're going to hold you accountable. They're going to figure out what you're doing, and they're going to hold you accountable. And you're not going to have impunity, the sort of impunity that the small handful of people that dominate America politically, economically, and financially that they have right now. They wouldn't be able to acquire that you could have power and wealth and still be held accountable by the public. Look at China. That is what's going on there. People think there's no protest there. They have no way of holding the government accountable. They do answer to the people. And this is why China is on its way up. And as you pointed out, why America is on its way down. You made this trade-off where you're not going to allow these people to get the education, the tools that they need, maintain the institutions they require to balance power within the country and hold people in power accountable. Okay, you have total impunity, but now you're looking at, now China's on the rise, Russia's reemerging. Russia has a smaller population than us. They have as many STEM graduates as we do. China has many times more STEM graduates. We need to educate our people, and we don't even know where to start because we've allowed it to unravel to such a degree, again, to make it easier for us to divide and control these people. Now we need them to do these difficult things that require education, and we don't even know where to start to do that. And I don't think they have any intention of seriously solving this. And what a lot of people missed was when President Trump was talking about reindustrializing the US, he had no real plan to do that. And if you looked at the plan, it would never work. If you want to reindustrialize a country, like you say, you need education, you need to invest in infrastructure, you have to look at the industries themselves and encourage purpose over profit. And the US wasn't going to do any of that. What they are doing instead is leaning on politically captured nations like Germany, South Korea, Japan. They're even getting Australia in on it. And they're going to use the human resources there, which maybe hasn't unraveled to the extent they have in the United States. And they will use that. They're talking about expanding shipbuilding. Not expanding shipbuilding significantly in the US, not the way things are right now. And what they're actually really doing is planning to use South Korea to do that. So they lied to the American people about reindustrializing. The things that they need to do that, they're not willing to do. What they're going to do instead is exploit the nations they call allies, which are really just politically captured client states. So it's a very sad state of affairs. Is history repeating itself? And the multipolar world, again, they need to face the reality that it is incumbent on them to check this, to stop it, and to preserve peace and stability worldwide, because the US will not. They're not going to, and they're not going to look inward and fix themselves, and they are not going to do the right thing worldwide.
Yeah, and I'll go back to what I was saying with the education. There's two major nuclear bombs laid at the very base of American society: the destruction of her educational system and the decline of her dollar. These two are exploding at the very same time. So it is hard for the American empire to maintain her sway. This is why she is lashing out everywhere. I like to say that she likes to throw stuff up against the wall to see if something is going to stick. And if it doesn't stick, she throws something else up against the wall. Anything to buy time for the empire except the right thing to do, which is self-reflection. It's always someone else's fault. It's like a kid. It's never my fault. It's always your fault. It's your fault that we have unemployment. It's your fault that our industry left us. It's your fault that our educational system sucked. It's your fault. It's never the politicians are 6-year-old kids. They never are adult enough to say, hey, maybe we can attract more bees if we have honey instead of to poop. He's- maybe if we look at this the right way and stop alienating the people, maybe in our fall, we won't fall so far so fast because we won't alienate everybody. But if we alienate the very people that buy the debt, when the debt comes back, no one will have a safety net for us, and the inflation will be hyperinflation, which will destroy the entire economy, which will upset the apple cart, causing the collapse of not only the American empire, but the American Republic. They can't do self-reflection like that. And why do you think they have become inebriated on the power that they used to have and the influence that they used to have? And this is fogging their brains up where they cannot do honest self-reflection.
Absolutely, they're not thinking about what got them there in the first place. All of this power and momentum that the United States has, they don't think about what enabled that. Or when they try to think about it, they do it in the worst way imaginable, and from the most cynical point of view imaginable. And that they're not going to stop and even ask, maybe the way we got here wasn't even the right way to do it in the first place. Because as China has proven, you can become a global superpower without invading other countries, without actually committing genocide, not having a bunch of NED-funded fake human rights organizations accuse you of genocide like they do to China, but actually commit genocide to build up your country, build it up on genocide, slavery, colonialism, seizing other people's countries, taking them from them, mass murdering them when they tried to oppose you, as the U.S. did in Hawaii. People might not know that. Or even the Philippines. The Philippines were literally a colony of the United States until 1946. And the Filipino people attempted to fight a war of independence against the U.S., and the U.S. mass murdered them, interned them in concentration camps, tortured them, and just killed them in huge numbers. And so this is how the U.S. got that power and momentum in the first place. They're not going to question that. In some cases, they're very proud of that. They just think, well, we're so big and strong, we could do might makes right. This is part of the ruling class mentality. And they're not interested in looking at other ways where they could achieve this. They don't care about win-win. It's a whole mentality, and it comes from generations of this mentality. And like I said, you're not going to deprogram these people. They're handing it down to the next generation of ruling elites, and it's just going to continue until people elsewhere stop it, unfortunately.
Well, as we transition to the Ukrainian crisis, I look at Trump and I see him doing everything that he was talking about Biden, and he was down in Biden but he is up in the ante with it. And he said Biden could push us into World War III with the stupid antics and policies that he's putting. And now he is talking about giving tomahawks. And I want to read something to you, Brian. Then I want you to expand on this. This is from RT, and the article is titled "Ukraine to Get Tomahawks If War Not Settled" from Trump. And it says the U.S. president has admitted that sending the weapons to Kiev would be a step of aggression towards Russia. U.S. President Donald Trump has said he could talk to his Russian counterpart, Vladimir Putin, about Washington's threat to send long-range Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine. Speaking to reporters on Sunday, Trump stressed that Ukraine would like to have Tomahawks, but that he could discuss the issue with Putin. I might say, look, if this war is not going to get settled, I'm going to send them Tomahawks, he said. The U.S. leader admitted that supplying the missiles to Kyiv would be a new step of aggression. Stop right there. With that said, I asked Larry Johnson on the show, if this took place, we know that it would take U.S. operators to strike, to use these weapons. If this took place and struck Russian territory, what would happen? And Larry Johnson said to me, then the U.S. would be faced, and NATO would be faced with an Oreshnik moment, meaning that Russia would strike with Oreshniks. And then I asked him, I said, just in Ukraine? He said, no, Russia might have to strike outside of Ukraine to demonstrate the seriousness of what goes on. Because remember that the Tomahawks are strategic weapons. They're not just battlefield weapons. These can be equipped with nuclear weapons. So what do you have to say about that?
I think we've been through this cycle many times, and people. I don't think you should. I don't think you should just say, "Well, no, Russia won't do anything." I mean, there might be a red line that is crossed where they say, "Okay, yes, we are going to start striking targets in Europe. We're going to." I don't think they're going to strike the continental United States. It is just a reality. The United States has a huge advantage. They are on the other side of the planet. They have oceans on either side of them, and it is just physically more difficult to strike at the United States and to do any serious damage to the United States than it is for the U.S., which has its military spanning the globe to do to other countries. That is a reality that countries have to accept and build policy around, whether they like it or not, whether it's right or wrong. They have to accept that reality. I think Tomahawk cruise missiles, just like all the other missiles, they're going to do damage to Russia. Is not going to turn the tide of the conflict. It'll raise the cost for Russia more, as everything has been throughout this conflict. But I think that they will be able to deal with it, and I think they will be able to continue on the ground, winning the war in Ukraine, which is in the long term, this is how they're going to get their revenge, by ultimately winning the conflict, not allowing themselves to get distracted and thrown off course, or by granting the collective West a pretext that the politicians can point to and rally people around, people that really aren't excited about this conflict right now. They're not going to do something that will allow the politicians to stir the people up otherwise. So I think they will continue being careful about this. I really like the Berletic missile. We saw them test it one time. We really don't know to the extent of how effective this is. We only saw them strike one target with it. So do we know that it can do all of these things that many people are assuming it can do? I don't know. As an analyst, I want to see the evidence. I don't think we have enough information to draw a definitive conclusion. So I think they will just continue. They will use their air defense systems to take down most of these missiles. They will suffer some losses. There will be damage. They will rebuild, just like they're doing with their oil refineries right now. I just want to point out that the drone campaign that is being waged against targets deep inside Russia, the energy production facilities, the pipelines, power plants, that is the U.S. carrying that out. So this entire time, it has been the U.S. carrying all of this out. The SBU conducts all of these long-range deep strikes into Russia. Who controls the SBU? The New York Times reported that the CIA went in 2014 and took over the SBU. They train them, they direct them, they have bases across Ukraine where the CIA officers themselves are there on the ground with the SBU, and they are the ones running all of these operations when they're killing Russian generals, when they're assassinating, murdering journalists, just outright terrorism. That's the CIA doing that hand in hand with the SBU. That's what they're doing. And Russia knows this. They've known it all along. They're just being very patient, and they are doing what they feel like they need to do to ultimately win this conflict. They have to stay focused on that, because like I say, nobody should just think it's a given that they're just going to win. They have to concentrate on that. They cannot become complacent. The Tomahawk, I just don't see how they're going to be able to, just like with the ATACMS, the Storm Shadow, I just don't see how they would be able to get enough of them into Ukraine and fire them in large enough salvos and often enough to do the type of damage that they would need to do. Just think about Russia. They've been firing thousands of missiles into Ukraine, and look, Ukraine is still there. How many missiles would Ukraine, and by that I mean the United States, need to launch into Russia, which is much larger, with much more infrastructure, much more industry? How many thousands of missiles more would the U.S. need to launch into Russia to achieve just the same results Russia has achieved in Ukraine? So it's something that we have to consider. I don't think we should blow it out of proportion. Of course, Russia is not going to sit there and say, we don't care about Tomahawks. They care. They have to make it serious. They have to say what they have to say to try to discourage the U.S. from doing this. But at the end of the day, if the U.S. is going to do it, they're going to do it, and Russia cannot allow it to distract them from their ultimate objective.
You know, you brought up the point that you and I have spoken about a dozen times about how the U.S. has captured all of the institutions in Ukraine, especially the intelligence services. Well, knowing that, how can certain people say that the United States is being fed a steady stream of misinformation by the SBU when we know that it is the United States and the UK that controls the SBU and that even guard the parliamentarian people and the so-called president?
Yes, when I hear that, obviously I could just point to the New York Times articles admitting that all of the military matters are being determined by U.S. generals in Germany, and the CIA is literally on the ground in Ukraine, basically running the SBU. So all of the intelligence that people in Washington are getting, this is all coming from the U.S. itself. I mean, they're briefing themselves here in this matter. The reason they're saying these things, I think, we don't know for sure. All of this is ultimately a theory. They need to convince people that this war should continue to be fought. They need to convince the Ukrainians, most of all, to continue fighting this war. And if you don't say things like, yes, the Ukrainians are losing territory, but the Russians are losing, 3,000 people a day, to do that, that compels the Ukrainians to continue fighting on. It compels people in Europe, maybe they're on the fence, or maybe they support the war, or maybe they don't like the war, but they're not doing anything actively to oppose it. Maybe that's what it takes to keep them at that level and maintain this proxy war. So I think that is why we hear these ridiculous conclusions being drawn by politicians in Washington. It really is to just encourage everybody to continue this disastrous war. If they told them the truth, and they know the truth, and how do we know the truth? If you look at all of my videos over the last 3+ years, I am only sourcing Western media. They admit all of this deep down inside all of their articles. They are admitting to all of this, so they know. People in Washington know, but they're going to lie and they're going to misrepresent it, and the reason to do that is public perception management.
So Brian, Russia is also faced with a domestic dilemma also, because people and even people on the National Security Council are saying that Russia should get more aggressive to show the United States that they are not playing. And there was an article that came out that said, I forget if it was the New York Post or something, they were talking about that Trump has said that he would overstep any red line that he felt that the United States should overstep that Russia has set up. Saying that and reporting that, and then Russians, the everyday Russians, seeing that the United States are doing what it's doing on the battlefield and the real-time intelligence and supplying the weapons and actually funding the entire war, because remember that it is the United States money that the Ukrainian government depends on for its budget. So pretty soon pressure builds. If you don't have a release valve, even for Vladimir Putin and his administration, then the people will say, hey, we may be winning the war, but why do we have to take this on our territory? Let's put something back on their territory. We are a respectable global power, and we cannot always allow them to be able to do something to us without us doing something back to them. Do you think it's reaching that point? Because I watch some programs, and I hear that rumbling sometimes of people saying that, hey, maybe we should strike outside of Ukraine just to let them know that you're going a little bit too far now.
There's always going to be sections of any population that are always demanding more. And I guess ideally, if you had to pick, you would want people overall demanding that you do more, rather than being upset about what you're doing right now, that you're doing too much and we shouldn't be doing this in the first place. So it's a good place to be, where if your society is demanding that you escalate further, rather than people being upset about where they are right now. So I think that's deliberate. I think it's carefully managed. You would hope that they were carefully managing this. They understand that people are frustrated with this. I think Russian people in general are very different than Westerners. People in Asia are very different. They get angry about these things, but in the back of their mind, they understand the virtue of patience and how important it is. And at the end of the day, being patient and waiting out all of this is ultimately in their best interest. And I think at the end of the day that will win out. And I think that's what they need to do also.
And do you think the United States will continue to escalate? Because to look at what is going on, this is not an L just for Ukraine. This is an L for the U.S. empire and all of its proxies and its war proxy, which is NATO and the European Union. So with what Russia is doing, Russia is killing 20 birds with one stone. Do you think that the United States will willingly allow for this to take place? Because this is a reflection on U.S. empire, and we know that once the stage is set and says the U.S. empire is weakened, you see more nations, small, medium, and large, start to buck up against the Western-dominated system, and that's what we see with the BRICS. So, do you think that because so much is at stake, the United States and NATO will continue to escalate? Because their life depends on it. Their rule depends on this.
I think to a degree that's true. On the other hand, they already knew ahead of time that if they provoked the war in Ukraine against Russia, that Ukraine would be destroyed. They understood that from the very beginning. They went ahead and did it anyway. You can see that, again, this goes back to your question about the propaganda coming out of Washington and out of the European Union, talking about Ukraine having some sort of chance of winning, turning the tide. Their goal is to fight to the last Ukrainian. They cannot do that if Ukrainians all come to the conclusion that they've lost this war and fighting on is pointless. They're just killing themselves for nothing. Actually, they're killing themselves for U.S. hegemony. It's not even to defend their country. Their country was never in any real danger from Russia. Their country was always in danger from U.S. political capture and being transformed into a battering ram and used in a proxy war. That was always the danger. That's what is consuming the country right now. I think they understand that. I'm talking about the West. They understand that Ukraine is going to be destroyed in this. They just want to do it as thoroughly as possible and raise the cost as much as possible. For Russia, if they feel like they're maybe cracking Russia's economy a little bit by striking refineries, they think they're having success with that, and they're talking about tomahawks to try to expand the number of refineries. You have to understand, you hit a refinery today, a couple of weeks from now, they will repair it. And so people are just adding up all of these strikes. So like they hit 32 out of 68 of the refineries, as if all of that taking place over several months, as if all of those refineries are permanently damaged. They're not. They repair them. The refineries themselves don't operate at 100% capacity all the time. They're always operating under capacity. And if they need to, they could be operated a little bit above normal operating capacity to compensate for other refineries that are temporarily offline. And so there's a lot of things Russia can do. But if they think that there's a crack there, maybe that's why they're escalating. And so there's many answers to this question. We really don't know for absolute certain. I think the one thing we do know, though, is they always understood Ukraine was going to lose. And this was all about extending Russia and putting pressure on Russia on as many pressure points as possible, Ukraine just being one of many, and maybe the centerpiece.
Well, on the flip side of that, the United States, Europe, the UK are all in an economic downward spiral. Russia is destroying their proxies in Ukraine, plus they're destroying the weapons and the weapon suits that the West has, and they're also destroying this mindset that Western weapons were better, and that the West is just this super strong, unbeatable force. So, with all of that going on, do you think that it may escalate closer to the nuclear threshold, because as you and I say, the empire is out of time. She's losing on the battlefield. She's losing economically. She's losing when it comes to technology. She's losing when it comes to trade. And America does not want to be sitting at a table as an equal. She would rather blow the whole table up than to sit there as an equal. So do you think that her policies will push us closer and closer towards a nuclear threshold between nuclear powers?
I think the threat of the use of nuclear weapons is high and getting higher. I think if someone's going to use them, it's going to be the U.S. or one of their proxies, especially Israel, because you can see they've gone, well, people they don't see this because they get wrapped up in it emotionally themselves. They don't understand this, but they are going out of their way to make Israel the villain. It's like you're watching professional wrestling, and Hulk Hogan used to be the good guy, and then he joined. There was like the NWO, and there was like this whole thing, and they had like they became the bad guys. They were like, and then they became anti-heroes. It was very weird and kind of. I don't really remember it that clearly, but the point is they went out of their way to take him from hero to villain. And he really reveled in it. He played that role, and he really made himself unlikable on purpose to play that role. And that is what Israel is doing right now. And obviously, part of the reason is they're using Israel to strike at Iran. And again, it's in the policy papers. Use Israel to do this so that Israel takes all of the blame and absorbs all of the retaliation. That's the whole point of it. And if you're going to use nuclear weapons, you would want to use a nation like Israel, and you would want them to be as hateable and as far away from everyone else as possible, so that when they do it, it doesn't become associated with you, even when you're the script writer, right? It's like Hulk Hogan, he was given a script. I mean, it's all fake. And so is politics across the West between themselves and their proxies. People got to understand that. It's very dangerous. But what I would say is, yes, the U.S. is out of time. They're lashing out. They've already gotten Ukraine wrapped up and consumed in this proxy war. You can see them positioning the rest of Europe. So I think before nuclear weapons, they're going to feed the rest of Europe into this proxy war. And you could see them, the coalition is willing, getting troops ready, making up all of these stories about Russian drones and Russia violating airspace and the drones going through Polish airspace, all of this nonsense. This is all to upset the European people and condition them to accept their inevitable involvement in this proxy war next. They will be fed next. It's a wood chipper. Ukraine is one branch fed in. Once you get to the end of that branch, you get the next branch, which is Europe. And so I think they will do that. They will exhaust their proxies, and then and only then maybe they will consider nuclear weapons. I think they would prefer their proxies to use them on their behalf rather than they themselves resort to using them and then attracting nuclear retaliation in turn.
Off subject, Nick Hall says, question, how is it possible that the Red Pill Diaries have so few subscribers? Well, I can tell you a few. I'm shadow banned. And every time I get subscribers, you could watch the number count go up. And if you come back a few days later, you'll see it down again. So, I mean, but listen, that really doesn't, to me, it really doesn't matter because everything comes in time. You do what you do. You focus on getting the truth out, and the truth in itself is the reward. Everything else comes on the heel of that. And I do believe that the dam will break soon. Because more people are learning and more people are seeing what's going on with the channel, and the dam will break. There are already fissures in it. You just asked the question. That's another fissure in the dam of the shadow ban. So I thank you for that, but I don't really worry about it. Brian, you have anything to say on that matter?
Yeah, I mean, I have my channel. I will go onto other people's channels to do interviews, channels that are, in terms of subscribers, smaller, but the interview will have way more viewers than I will ever get on any of my videos these days. I don't know how it works, but what I always talk about, and this brings us back to this whole global conflict. who controls all of these social media platforms? These are all US-based social media platforms. We know for a fact because they've admitted it themselves. They control the algorithms, and they are working together with special interests to control what people see and what they don't see. And so as long as we're stuck on these platforms, we're always going to be subjected to the algorithm and the way that it just buries us, and probably intentionally. Some cases it might just be, sometimes the algorithm is just pursuing, profit and popularity, and it's just, you just get buried in that. But sometimes it's very, very deliberate and political. It's very hard to tell the difference. But, one of the things I always say about the multipolar world, you could have all the weapons in the world. If you don't control your information space and you allow the United States this monopoly, I mean, they have a monopoly on global information space. That should not be allowed. The Russians, the Chinese, everybody else, they should be getting together and secure your own information space inside your country and create a BRICS-wide version of YouTube that's beyond the censorship and control manipulation of Washington, Wall Street, and Silicon Valley. How hard? I think that's hard to do. Okay, yes, people in the West obviously are going to be excluded. Maybe you could say TikTok is a nascent attempt at doing this, but a lot more needs to be done. I think people underestimate the power that U.S. dominion over global information space gives it. It gives it tremendous power. I watch here in Thailand, the slow increment, so slow you wouldn't notice unless you are really keeping track of it daily and weekly, monthly, yearly, how it just seeps in and it just pulls people in, and it slowly brainwashes them, changes their point of view, their perspective, their view on international relations, and even their own relationship with their own country and culture. It takes control over everything because they're going for your mind. And what is human society? What is human civilization? Where is it all actually taking place? Yes, with our bodies in the physical realm, but what's driving all of that is our mind. So if you have all the weapons in the world, but if the US can convince a nation's population not to get in those tanks, or to get in those tanks and point the guns in a different direction, then that's it. You lose. And we've watched this happen. We've watched otherwise powerful nations collapse because they have no control over their information space.
So, Brian, let's take a couple of questions. For those of you who are watching, before we end the show, if you have any questions for Brian, please put them in the comments real quick so that we can go through and he can answer them real quick for you guys. So while they're putting them up, Brian, so how is it going on the Thailand border? Because I know that the United States was manufacturing this friction there. So what's going on there? Has it died down some?
It's still a point of contention. The Cambodian government has, everyone keeps saying that it's, they're allies with China, and China did invest a lot in Cambodia. There's no doubt about that. But the Cambodian government is run by Hun Sen and his family, and they're interested in they and themselves, and they don't really care about the rest of the country, and it shows. If you've ever been there, it shows. And they were taking Chinese. What happened was Hun Sen was getting old. He's been the leader of Cambodia for decades. He's getting old, and he was getting ready to hand over to his son. And the U.S. for a brief time, they had the NED inside Cambodia building up the opposition, and they wanted to get their sock puppet into power, and they failed. Hun Sen stomped it into the ground, jailed them, caused them to flee. And so the U.S. is like, all right, well played. We tried. Haha, you got us. Now we'll do business with you and your son. How's that? And Hun Sen said yes. And so that's what they're doing. His son was educated in West Point. It's very pro-American. And Cambodian policy has shifted very, very close to the United States, especially military cooperation. And then in Thailand, Thaksin Shinawatra, this billionaire, he's been working for the Americans for decades, and his daughter was prime minister. And so they worked together to cause this border conflict. The Thai military was dragged in and ended up in this fight with the Cambodian military. And then when it was over, or at least it paused, They ousted Thaksin Shinawat's daughter, Thaksin himself. I think he's in jail. Right? I'm not sure. He's in jail or he's got an ankle bracelet thing in his house, something like that. And so they were put on notice in essence. And so now Cambodia is stirring up as much trouble as possible on the border, and Thailand is trying to play the long, patient game and avoid provocation. And again, why is the U.S. doing this now? It's doing this now because it's trying to turn Asia into what it has already turned Europe into, a united front pointed at Russia. That's what Europe has been turned into. They've got the Middle East. They're turning into a united front pointed at Iran. And now they want to take Asia, destabilize it, cause chaos, and if they can, capture nations and point them as battering rams against China. So that is what's going on. Again, they were destabilizing Indonesia. They toppled the government in Nepal. They're working on this border conflict here with Thailand and Cambodia. And really, it's a tragedy, because if you've ever been to I've been to that border region, Thai people and Cambodian people get along real well. There's people living on both sides of the border. My Thai wife, her family has people from Cambodia or half Cambodian in her family. So I mean, it's a shame and it's unnecessary. But it's like every other conflict the U.S. stirs up. It's always unnecessary, artificial in nature, and they just depend on people not knowing what's going on to sustain it and to escalate it.
Darth Vader says, "What is the situation in Myanmar and Nepal?"
Well, I was just talking about Nepal. There was one of these Gen Z protests. The protesters were all funded by the U.S. government. The media promoting the protests were all funded by the NED, and I've shown the evidence of this. And now the interim government that took over, because they successfully toppled the government, half of the ministers have their own NED-funded organization that they either founded or were directing. Half of that. So there's 8 the last time I checked, there were 8 appointed. 4 of them have NED organizations of their own that they came from before becoming ministers. If that tells you anything, I mean, it should tell you everything. Myanmar, they had a U.S. client regime in power. Aung San Suu Kyi, the military ousted her from power. They formed the National Unity Government, the ousted U.S. puppets. It's called the NUG. They're not even in Myanmar, but they have all these militants and terrorists who are fighting basically I wouldn't call it a civil war, a proxy war against the central government in Myanmar. And I think we were just talking about that at the beginning of the show, the blockade of China. There's a pipeline that goes through Myanmar. These terrorists attack that pipeline to cut it. And that is part of imposing the blockade on China. So China has the choke points cut off from them by the U.S. Navy, and U.S. proxies on land cut the Belt and Road Initiative projects, then China is strangled. That is literally what they're doing right now.
I don't know if this was a question for you, Brian, or if it was just a statement, but M. Spark says, "Wonder if Brian still has the same two-state position, or has old boy awakened to the subject on Palestine?"
Well, as opposed to what? What should happen in the region? Should Israel exterminate all the Palestinians? Should the Palestinians exterminate all of the Israelis? How would they even do that? And so let's be realistic. It's not about what you wish was reality. It is what is actually reality. You could say, look, and we would agree, and I would agree, that creating Israel in the middle of the region like that was wrong. When did that happen? It didn't happen like a couple of years ago. There are people who are born in Israel. So what do? Are you going to displace them? What do you think is the answer? Do you have a plan? And if you have a plan, what are you doing to make it a reality? And if you can't make it a reality, it's probably a good reason for that.
Someone says the super chat. M. Spark says the super chat is not working again. That's what they do, man. All right. It's the thought. So let's. Jay has a question. He says, "What do you think about nations outside of Western influence adopting digital ID? Is this more of a sign of a global collaboration and keeping the masses controlled?"
Technology is a double-edged sword. It all depends on whose hands it's in. If you're China and you're using technology to organize your society more efficiently and effectively, then it could be a good thing. there's always the possibility of abuse, which is why you have to have educated, well-informed citizenry to keep it in check. And in the West, we see absolutely everything they do. They are abusive. They abuse the technology. They're not using any of it in any even remote sense to even give people the illusion of peace, stability, and prosperity. They are just abusing it and using it for control. So you have to, you cannot just say the technology is bad, get rid of it. You have to say who's using it and why. Is there a way to use it productively? Is there a way to use it abusively?
And Nick Hall says, free Imran Khan. Question: do you believe Pakistan is vassal of USA or acting just like Turkey?
I think Turkey is also a vassal of the United States. Pakistan and India, for that matter, these are very complex societies. There's many working parts. You can't just say the whole country is a U.S. puppet or the whole country isn't. You have different factions, even within the military, that are pro or anti. As being a proxy. They're not. Some are okay with being a U.S. proxy. Some are not, and same goes with the government. And when all of this lines up in a way that where more than not are pro-U.S., then you see really bad policy that is destructive for Pakistan. And the same goes for India right across the border.
So my last question, I get the last question of the day, everybody, with Brian. Brian, do you believe that there will be a war between Israel and Iran in the coming weeks to months? And if so, do you believe that this will mark a regional war where Iran will not pull punches?
I think the U.S. and Israel are getting ready for a war with Iran. I mean, you can plan it, and then things could come up where you delay it or you end up not going for it. But the goal has always been regime change in Iran. They want to get rid of Iran, and they're going to continue working toward that end. If and when it happens, was Iran pulling punches in its last confrontation? People want to believe that they did. I don't think that they did. I think they have a tremendous missile capability, but they were hit hard. Their air defenses, I don't think, performed optimally. I think Israel and the United States were able to target the missile launchers themselves. They were able to take out more of them than I think people want to admit. We saw the number of missiles flying to Israel greatly reduced as the conflict continued. People were saying, well, they depleted Israeli air defenses, so they don't need to send as many. It's like, if you send 100 and 10 get through on the first day, and then you send 100 the next day and 100 get through, why not just keep sending 100 every day until everything is gone? Like, why would you do that? And the answer is actually, yes, Israel and the US were running out of air defense munitions, but I think Iran was also running out of launchers. They did not have the number of them able to fire at the same time as they did in the beginning of the conflict. This is something that they're working on. This is something people condemn Russia and China for not doing more. I think we've talked about this in the past. Realistically, there's only so much they can do, and what they can do, they are doing to help Iran. And so we just have to wait and see. It's going to be a very difficult time for Iran. It will continue to be a very difficult time for the Palestinian people and for the entire region. As long as the U.S. and its proxies serve Washington's interests at the expense of everybody in the region, then it's going to be a very difficult time in the years ahead.
It was one question that I overlooked, Brian, and I'm sorry.
Sure. No, I'm fine. If you want to ask more questions, I'm fine.
Okay.
I'm Red Panda. Here,
so. All right. Red Panda Pie says, how would it look like a change in U.S. politics in the future? It seems to me there should be a global change at the same time in the EU, USA to reach a multipolar world, a collective effort.
I think the U.S. and Europe, they will change eventually, but it's going to happen and we just hope that this is the way it plays out. The multipolar world is able to successfully defend itself and contain U.S. hegemony and the aggression that it seeks to use to impose that hegemony. And then after a certain amount of time, it's a system that has to constantly consume and take from others. And when it cannot do that, it will collapse. And then hopefully something more constructive takes its place. And maybe as a condition of working with the rest of the world, so they have to be constructive and work with the rest of the world. And let's hope by that time, nations like China and Russia have risen to such an irreversible extent that there's nothing the U.S. can do, even if they do change their mind, decide not to be constructive again.
Okay. Heidi, since you said a couple of more questions, they're coming in, Brian.
Sure.
Heidi K says, question, did either of you hear about the skirmish between Pakistan and the Taliban at their border? What is Pakistan's deal? They are close to China, but also seem to be collaborating with the U.S. Brian, you could take that question.
Yeah, so this goes back to all of the different factions inside Pakistan. There are factions that are working with China. There are factions that are working with the United States. It's the same here in Thailand. And it's a real problem. And again, this goes to not securing your information space, not clearing out these fake opposition parties funded and backed by the United States, which should not exist. You should not have a political party in your country that is sustained by foreign interests. It should be illegal. It's basically treason. So I don't know why it's allowed. Well, I mean, realistically, it's not that it's being allowed, it just exists and they lack the power to remove it. And so this will continue. This will be a problem. And this is at the root of why countries like Pakistan fall behind in terms of development. Also India. They have Western style democracy. People never stop and ask, why? Where did that come from? Did they decide to adopt that system? And why? And is it the best system for them? Or was it imposed on them as a system of control? Because the US and Europe, they use Western-style democracy and elections to manipulate the political outcomes in targeted nations. This will be a problem until people wake up to this. There needs to be a revolution in terms of securing information space, seeing it as a national security domain, and thinking about an alternative to Western-style democracy, because it is a scam. It is a giant scam.
And once again, my friend, my colleague, Brian Berletic hits it out the park. Thank you so much, Brian, for joining me on today's program, man. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me on, and thank you, everyone, for tuning in.
And everybody join me back here at 12 p.m. Central Time today. We'll have Alex Craner on the show, and I really appreciate everybody for showing your love, for staying as long as you can. Remember to do right by others, not because there's some material gain in it or because some accolades may come behind it. Do right by others because it's the right, the humane, and the godly thing to do. Because even when no one else is watching you, God Almighty is watching you. As my late mother would always say, God sits high, but he looks low. Know that I love each and every one of you who loves truth, but know that the love that I have for you will always pale in comparison to the love that God has for you. Until we next speak again, stay strong, stay true, but remember to always stay righteous. Hey, mama, your baby boy loves you more than life. Thank you, everybody. Deuces, we're out of here. Peace.
My first and last mistake. I'm blue without your face, but what can I do? 'Cause I'm just a